Alright, welcome to Age of Empires, the Return of Rome expansion for Age of Empires 2. We're going to explore a topic today, the Bronze Age collapse, and there's no better way to do it than by playing it at the same time. And it's just going to be kind of a open kind of monologue about it and other various topics. So, without further ado, so the Bronze Age collapse is one of the biggest mysteries in human history. So, you got the Mediterranean Sea, and then you got 4 or 5 different empires here: Hittites, Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians. And then you got the Mycenaeans, which are the predecessors to the Greeks. Let's see. Yep, drought, crop failures. And this is going to lead in really good to one of the major topics we're going to be talking about, which is the importance of, supply chains, maritime routes, and then controlling the various choke points around the world. Yep, the sea peoples. All right, let's go ahead and get started here. So, okay, we got Bronze Age collapse. It's like we're the Phoenicians. That's probably the most accurate. So nobody really knows for sure who the Sea Peoples were. They were probably a lot of different groups, because the Mediterranean at the time was pretty poorly understood. Maritime technology at the time wasn't all there, to say the least. So our first order of business is figuring out where we're going to settle. Let's see. Alright, so it looks like we got Egypt or Libya down here. Actually, it should tell us here. Gotta defeat all the major powers. Wow. Doesn't really tell us, so it looks like we can go to one of these 4 locations. And Egypt would probably be a decent place. We could go, I'm guessing that's Canaan. Yeah. Crete. I would say strategically our best bet right now is going to be Egypt. So we'll go ahead and wipe these guys out. Dang, I haven't played this in a minute. Ugh. Honestly, we can go and wipe this out, set up a camp here, and then we got plenty of resources up there. So yeah, we'll just wipe out what's left of these guys. A couple villagers, oh well. There, why not? Our food we can get from fishing, so there's that. One thing I really find interesting about the Sea Peoples is how, besides how mysterious they are, is how closely intertwined they are with the Bible. Because when the Sea Peoples came, there's a famous book about it. It's called 1177. I forget who the author was. But it's a pretty standardized book as far as talking about the Bronze Age collapse. At that time, 1177, that was about the same time that the Israelites were kind of establishing themselves in the land of Canaan. We don't know the exact years, obviously, like that's up for debate, but it's generally around that time, and it would really explain a lot. So before a lot of people, when they think about the Babylonian Empire, there were really three major iterations of the Babylonians, those being the Paleo-Babylonians, Old Babylon, that's where we learn about Hammurabi, the guy that, for all intents and purposes, invented the legal codes that we still derive from today. There's the middle period, that's the Kassite Babylonians, that's what we're dealing with in this scenario. And that's maybe, so the old Babylonian Empire is maybe 2400 to, I don't know, 1500 BC, just a rough guess. And then when that empire collapsed, the old Babylonian Empire was basically the world's first global supply chain. It was essentially a descendant of the Akkadian Empire that you might have heard of, like Sargon of Akkad. Hang on a second, I need to concentrate. We're gonna die. Go to storage right there. There you go. Perfect. Get some commerce rating. Build a few thoughts here. Let's start with a couple. We got. Oh, these are okay. Just barbarians. Okay, so we'll go ahead and build a storage pit right there. Perfect. Uh-oh. Hittites visiting City Watch. Oh, no wonder I'm having problems. Oh snap. I don't even need to do that. Look at it. Go ahead and do that. I need wood. So we need, let's get a, let's go with a stable. There's our mobility here. Just one. And then market. Oh, we already have a market. Perfect. So we'll just do that. And okay, scratch that. Fishing boats, trade boats. I'm guessing I don't get those until I have a market. Makes sense. Oh snap, we got, yeah, just raid those merchants if you don't mind, there we go. See, that's honestly the biggest advantage that the Sea Peoples would have had, is that they were commerce raiders. And commerce raiding is, historically, has been a very decisive tactic, especially when one side is outmatched on the sea, in order to kind of, or on land. See, if a country or some sort of a power is strong on land but weaker on the sea, that can open them up to, you know, having their commerce their ships raided at sea. Vice versa too. A country that, never mind. Okay. Build farms now. Sweet. War galley. Almost the Bronze Age. Okay, so I think we'll just make sure that our friends, the Egyptians, can't cause us any problems. But we'll go ahead and grab, I think that's Crete up there. We'll go ahead and blockade that island too. Oh, looks like we got a good deal up here. Huh. Alright, so what I was talking about before, the old Babylonian Empire under Hammurabi. Oh, sweet. That makes a lot easier. So there was this trade, especially the Bronze Age. I mean, fitting, this is the Bronze Age collapse, right? Now, the Bronze Age was named after the key resource, bronze. And what bronze was an alloy of copper and tin. Now, so long as they had access to both those materials, it was all hunky-dory. Okay, nice. Okay, so anyway, bronze, I don't think this is even worth settling, really. This is more... Yeah, I'll just build a couple towers here, use it as kind of a choke point. Their ships will just go right through, so... Yeah, there we go. So yeah, copper is an alloy of... bronze is an alloy of copper and tin. So, copper, I forget which came from which, but one was predominantly mined in the area around Afghanistan. The other, I think, Cyprus or Libya or something like that. I could look it up. It's pretty interesting because it's really the world's first major supply chain. Not screw it, I'll build a town center right there, get some gold. It's the world's first major supply chain that was truly expanded multiple continents and multiple cultures. Because you had Afghanistan, you had Bactria, you had Anatolia, and then you have Cyprus and the islands in the Mediterranean. And for the bronze trade to work and for bronze to be created, you had to have that entire supply chain open. Once the Sea Peoples emerged in the it'd be the 12th century BC. Once they started to come en masse, they disrupted that supply chain, and that's one of the major factors, probably one of the biggest ones, that along with drought, and they definitely raided a lot of the food sources, the Nile being the most predominant. And essentially they disrupted the global economy, and it was the first time, at least in recorded history, where a global supply chain collapsed. and it really shows how vulnerable these chains are. See, look at this. All I got to do is disrupt their merchant ships, and I mean, there's not. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they'll attack me. I don't know how well programmed this particular scenario is. Anyway, enough blabbing for a second. Let's get to. Yeah, let's develop a little bit, and then there we go. Okay, this is gonna be sea base. A little submarine base right here is what this is. Build some U-boats. Yeah, speaking of which, I've been doing a lot of kind of studying and research lately. That's probably the biggest vulnerability the Allies had during, and I don't know if this is a good idea. Yeah, that's a bad idea. Oh man, they've really been slacking. Okay, don't lead him back to the base. What do we have that's good? I haven't played with Phoenicians for a while. Okay. Hoplites. Camels. Elephants, but I don't get those till the next stage. Cedars of Lebanon, right? Woodcutters. Okay, so camels and sorry, 200. Okay, I can. Okay. Another one of those. Walls would be useful. Okay, perfect. Now we can advance. Maybe the Mycanians would be smart to dispatch with first. Now in the Bible, we do have probably the biggest example of sea peoples, and this is a really fascinating topic to me, the Philistines. And there's a lot of evidence that the Philistines were descendants of Mycanians, possibly even Minoans, which were the ancient Cretan civilization. They were from Crete. And the Cretans were, I mean, Crete's really fascinating because it's the birthplace of one of the, basically the people that invented a maritime, like the first real maritime empire to speak of came from Crete, the Minoans. Alright, we're not hurting for resources, now we're just hurting for concentration. There we go. Good, we're... okay. Got that wall being built up. Okay, we'll get triremes, and then we can start ravaging the enemy. Yeah, let's do that. Well, it looks like we've sort of disrupted their supply chain a little bit. Okay, perfect. Let's see if there's a good approach here against the Mecanians, because if we can knock them out, we can colonize that. Oh, snap. There's their wonder. Right there. Perfect. Oh, man. Okay. So all we gotta do... This should be enough right here on its own to knock them out. And I'm not sure if they'll surrender as soon as we take out their wonder or not, but it's worth a shot. Okay, there you go. Yeah, just... Haha. Yeah, we can just wipe them out with our ships there, and then let's get some Juggernauts, catapult triremes. Okay, where is my market? One thing I do like in Age of Empires 1 is how most of the economic upgrades also give a military advantage to them as well. Okay, we got Falinga. No. Do we? Okay, what? Oh, we're... Okay, yeah, we're... that makes sense. Yeah, I'll do a full episode at some point on this Bronze Age collapse. It's such an interesting topic. Staggered. Beautiful. Okay. Now, they're close enough to the coast that we can just screw them over with coastal bombardment. Okay, yeah, there. Okay, that's one. This is a little cheap when I'm doing it, whatever. Ooh. Alright, let's... okay. So we got those, we got elephants. Temple. Looks like we'll need some chariots for the old Egyptians. Elephants, nice. Transport, actually. As Gen Z would say, it's so over, we're so cooked. Well, they're so cooked. Man, they're just hiding. I guess that's all going. Whatever. All right. Barbarians. Now, there's also a theory that I heard, which I actually find fairly convincing, and that's that the Tower of Babel in the Bible wasn't so much a literal singular tower as it was a representation of the old Babylonian Empire, which wouldn't really be that far-fetched because, I mean, if you're all familiar with those ancient civilizations, especially in that region, one of the most common structures was the ziggurat, which is literally what the Tower of Babel is described as. You know what? Oh crap. Really no match for me. These villagers have the right to keep bear arms, so I'll take that. Pitchforks. So the Hittites have a little trading outpost there. Yeah, as long as we just give them a hard time, you don't really have to destroy that much. You know, let's take out that dock, screw it. We have plenty of natural resources anyway. I feel like this is a little bit inaccurate in the sense that the Phoenicians have access to the heaviest units in the game, whereas the Sea Peoples are known for basically being, you know, pirates and lightly armed and everything. Actually, we really don't know that well for sure, though. Okay, what do we got up here? What's that left? Okay, so we gotta wipe out the Medicanians. What's it say here? 0 to 5? Huh. Oh, I guess we just get a financial bonus for not being on wonder. That makes sense. Okay, so we'll start a campaign here against the Hittites. Get away from me. Whatever. What do we need? You know, honestly, more wood would not hurt. We're almost there too. Okay. Centurions. Go. Okay, so we got Cyprus right there. Bosphorus. You can just sail right up there, I think. I'm pretty sure. Let's do that. So, back to what we were talking about with the Babylonians. There's a massive, massive empire, too. And yeah, they would have had the I think the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. Might be the New Kingdom. Egypt's, yeah, because you got the old Assyrian, the old Babylonian, and the old Kingdom Egyptians. But the old Kingdom Egyptian kingdom is like way older than the old Kingdom Babylonians or Assyrians. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, we're looking at 3 to 4,000 BC. But the crazy thing to think about too is, because I mean, I live in America. We live in a time where it seems like, have you ever heard the term the end of history? It feels like things aren't going to change. It feels like, you know, America's always been here. Britain's always been here. You know, you got Russia, you've got Iran, you got China. I mean, China's always been there. No exceptions. But America's only been around for 250 years as of this year. But how long were these ancient empires around for? There was a Greek, I think he was a Spartan actually, mercenary named Xenophon, who famously wrote the Anabasis because he went to fight on behalf of, I think it was King Cyrus the Great, yeah. Was it Xerxes? No, it was Xenophon, I think, because, yeah, it would have been before the Persians invaded. But anyway, he was walking through the ruins of Nineveh, and he wrote about these massive walls and structures that he saw, and he didn't have a clue at the time what civilization they were from, or like, it was all just dead. It was like an ancient relic, and that was just 200, I think less than 200 years, because Nineveh was wiped out by the Babylonians and the Scythians. Was it 612 BC. But when it was wiped out, it was wiped out. Okay, got some tights just sitting there. Alright, not coming through here, bud. Might as well attack our friends, the Canaanites. Why can't I build siege weapons? Oh, is it a market tech that I need? Wait a second. Oh, whatever. I don't really need them anyway, because all I get is a stone thrower. Oh, I wonder if it's disabled. Okay, maybe, maybe not. I'll be right back. Just let him attack and see what happens. Knock that out, send it in. That's another thing too, is that these empires, they definitely had standing armies and everything, but they probably didn't expect the sort of attacks, especially attacks from enemies that they couldn't see, where they were, and they're probably really decentralized too. It's kind of like the equivalent of fighting, well, I mean, it's really like the Mongols, except from the sea, and most of these cultures probably hadn't, except maybe the Greeks, probably had no idea really what they were dealing with, or where they were coming from. It's one thing to fight an enemy, like it's like a near peer, like, you know, the Hittites versus the Kassites or the Assyrians. One that you at least knew about and had a similar state structure, but the Sea Peoples didn't have such a thing, at least not that was known about. So it's like fighting an alien force, and it's a lot easier to at least fight something that you know what you're dealing with than not. Alright, I said I'd be right back. I'm just gonna finish the job here in Mecania. Time to get some juggernauts pumping. Alright, looks like these guys are all but dead. Time to switch to cavalry because honestly I don't really feel like trying to hunt him down with centurions. Take way too long. Oh, we're Mecanians up there. Alright, we're gonna speed up this process. Oh, okay, I need an archery range. Right, now I could start trading with them too, but that sort of defeats the whole purpose of the point of the Sea Peoples, so out of respect for the historical parameters, I'm not gonna do that. Although, that being said, I probably shouldn't be building armies of centurions either. It's maybe 1,000 years removed. Okay. I'll just start bombarding the Phoenician coast here. Phoenician Canaanite. That's another thing too. The Phoenicians, which is the civ we're playing as, they, oh look at that, 1177. The Phoenicians were the first real organized maritime power that's really well documented, and then they're inseparable. We talk about the ancient Israelites, so King David, King Solomon, the period of the Judges. I missed, whatever. They were deeply intertwined with the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians helped build the temple. They actually did probably most of the heavy lifting. You can think of it sort of as the relationship between, let's see, what's a good example here? You've got basically a land power that's connected, intertwined at the roots with a sea power. Phoenicia was basically the sea, the maritime side of the, I would almost go so far to, it's really the ancient Semitic kingdom on the coast of the Levant is what it was. Because the Phoenicians and the Israelites, with all the intermarriages and shared religious tendencies, to put it lightly, that they had, it was essentially one civilization, especially the northern kingdom of Israel. The elephants. I can build elephant archers too. Let's build some more houses. Okay, the Egyptians are attacking. Oh, and here's another interesting thing. When the Israelites were in captivity with the Egyptians, well, it wasn't really captivity until the very, very late period. Yeah, Moses. But the you know how long they lived there? It was about 400 plus years, and originally they were in Egypt as, you know, they were sojourning. They didn't really have their own homeland at the time, because when they went to Egypt, it was just one family basically, because it's literally just the sons of Jacob. Oh, I can just, oh no, I'm not even gonna take out the pyramids, too much armor. Yeah, so they went into Egypt, where under Joseph they basically saved the Egyptian society, and then they lived there in the nice region, Goshen, for about 400 years, and it wasn't until after, basically when they were seen as a threat, that they were started to be persecuted. It's kind of a similar situation to maybe the Ottomans with the Christian populations and how they, you know, I mean, the Ottomans and the Turks in general encroached and conquered the areas that was historically part of the Roman Empire, but they used the young boys and the people that were, especially Christians, they used them as slaves, and a lot of that was because they were afraid that they would outnumber them. But I mean, the Christians were there first too. Okay, that's stupid. I don't need those. Okay, no. Okay, I need gold. Good thing I have plenty of gold available. Oh, Assyrians. Now, it's interesting the connection between the Phoenicians, the Israelites, and the Carthaginians, because and the Canaanites, because the Phoenicians are from Lebanon, and most likely they were largely descendants of the Sea People as well, because at least in the Bible they don't really appear until as Phoenicians until the time of King Solomon. And you got the Philistines, but the Phoenicians in the Bible are kind of a weird situation because they're not explicitly portrayed as good or bad per se. They're kind of somewhere in the middle, but most of the worst people of, like Queen Jezebel, for instance, and a lot of the wives of Solomon, they're definitely portrayed as some of the most wicked people, and that's really what Baal worship comes from, because Baal, remember, the golden calf when the Israelites were coming out of Egypt was not the same thing as Baal. It was more of akin to worshiping God but doing it your own way, or rather pretending to worship God and doing it your own way. Oh, okay, there's another little structure. Palace of Locust. No, well, that's convenient. The little town center right there. Now, Phoenicia, they colonized, well, this area right here, actually, Carthage. Actually, it's a bit further west of this, but Carthage. And Carthage had the same relationship to the Phoenician city-states of predominantly Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos as America had to Britain. And Carthage was founded around 820 roughly BC, but it didn't fall until like 164, I think it was, BC. And when it fell, it was completely wiped out. But Carthage has lasted about 2 to 3 times as long as the United States has even existed. And if you were to ask anyone in that time period, like you could look at it almost as though Carthage was like America, and something like Babylon, Syria, or Persia was Russia, because they're very similar ideas. They were Carthage and Phoenicia, and largely because of Phoenicia, Israel itself, they were thalassocracies. Judah and Israel were kind of, what were they? I mean, they were, yeah, it's hard to say for sure. Yeah. It's interesting because we don't really have a ton of actual writings about ancient Israel outside the Bible either. Beautiful. But it's also interesting because the northern kingdom of Israel declines over 200 to 300 years, although it is, by worldly standards, pretty prosperous for a while, but then they start to, oh snap, but they gradually decline, and you end up with a point where almost every ruler is assassinating the one before them. You know, like Zimri, Tibni, Omri. Oh man, the Caesars. To the point where they eventually get taken over by the Assyrian Empire, which, if you're familiar at all with history in that time period, you don't want to get taken over by the Assyrian Empire. They are the most brutal empire ever to live, and they were proud of it. That was part of their identity. When the prophet Jonah was sent to Nineveh, he prophesied that they, he gave. You all know the story of Jonah, I'd imagine. He basically got really pissed that he gave a prophecy to Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria, and then God didn't do anything because they repented, and he was resentful that they didn't repent, because he knew how wicked they were. I can kind of understand where he was coming from, because imagine if you were living during a time where some enemy army had plundered your village, and then you were told that God would forgive them if they repent. But then again, it's like, well, yeah, it's great that they repented, but they still did all this stuff. Nineveh was still wiped out in basically a day. It just was prolonged. It wasn't wiped out right at that second. But 612 BC was the end of Assyria for good. It never came back. What are we doing? Then you ended up with, Babylon, Persia, brief period under Alexander with the Macedonians, and then the Seleucids. Oh man, they're just sitting ducks. This is kind of cheap anyway. Do I not get armored elephants? Yeah, I do. Oh, it's being researched. Okay, good. Well, we'll just do that. So that must be the Euphrates. Oh yeah, and we still got the Kassites. Alright, now since we're just talking about random topics, let's talk about Babylon. So, we talked about the Paleo-Babylonian Empire, the empire that basically invented laws, at least the first that we know of that invented a general code of laws, Hammurabi's Code. And then when they collapsed, it basically destroyed the global supply chain, and some evidence that it was really a global supply chain that collapsed was the fact that right around that time, 1177 roughly, it wasn't just the Babylonians. Wait a second. It wasn't just the Kassites. So, the Kassites, like the Middle Babylonian Kingdom, the Old Babylonian Kingdom came before. Let me double check and verify this real quick. Oh, interesting. Okay, I was slightly incorrect there. So as the old Babylonian Empire fell around 1500, but the Kassites, they were another ethnic group in the Babylonian region from the Zagros Mountains who essentially commandeered the Babylonian Empire, and they controlled Babylon until, let's just say 1155, right around that same time. But the point I was making was that it wasn't just the Babylonians who fell, it was the Babylonians, the Hittites, the Egyptians, and this was also right around the same time that scholars believe the Trojan War happened. The Trojans themselves were most closely related to Hittites, who we don't really have a direct descendant. Like we don't. It's really hard to trace exactly who the Hittites were today. They more than likely assimilated into other cultures. There we go. Get our sea people chariot army going there, and we don't even have. Dang, we're really slacking. Alright, let's wrap this up. I don't want this video to go too long. Again, I'm not exactly a historian. A lot of this information I'm saying, don't take my word for it. I might screw up some small details, but it's more so about the general idea is what I'm trying to talk about. But anyway, all four of these empires, oh yeah, and the Mycenaeans, they basically collapsed because you end up with the Greek Dark Ages that started right around that same time, about 1000 BC to about 500 or 600, and during that time you had the Dorians and the Danans, and then eventually you don't hear too much about the Greeks until around a little bit before the Persian Wars, around 500 BC, and that's where you get the early historians, Herodotus, and you get Thucydides later. And without them, it would be almost a blind spot of what was really going on during that time. Yeah, the Greeks, and then the Greek Dark Ages, and then the Assyrians also kind of disappear. You don't hear hardly anything from the Assyrians about between the mid 12th century BC up until the they come back, and they slowly come back too, as the power of Israel is diminished. Like when King David is, I think I got chariots here. When King David is the king, and you have Solomon, you don't hear about the Assyrians really at all. The main enemy, because obviously you have the civil war between the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, and that being between the house of King Saul and the house of King David. And then what do you have? You have the Amalekites. Saul. With King David, the biggest issues. Oh yeah, and the Philistines, obviously, who are sea peoples, which actually goes into the idea that really how powerful the sea peoples were, and how the Philistines, being most likely just a branch of the sea peoples, how they came in and filled this power vacuum that wasn't there before. But outside of the Philistines, you really don't have many examples, at least in the Bible. I'd love to see if there's something else, but most of the issues King David's dealing with are domestic issues. Because you have Philistines, you have the rebellion of Absalom, and then you also have the Jebusites when they conquered Jerusalem, and that's really the probably the most important conquest of King David was against Jerusalem, and then you have him numbering the troops later. But he really doesn't deal with much outside of that. And then King Solomon, which Solomon's name in the Hebraic Shlomo means man of peace. Solomon's famous for being blessed with essentially a 40-year period of peace, and it's during that time of peace that Israel and Phoenicia are a literal superpower. Because you don't hear about the Mecanians, you don't hear about Assyrians, you don't hear about Babylonians, you don't hear about, there were there were Hittites mentioned, and Egyptians are still around. The Egyptians really were the only of the five major powers that they came out of it at least not completely wiped out. The Egyptians definitely felt the impacts of the Bronze Age collapse, but their civilization wasn't completely destroyed like the other ones. Now, essentially, what you had under the rule of King Solomon was a unipolar world where you had the superpower being Israel and the Phoenician city-states. And we all know that King Solomon married a lot of these princesses. And if I were to take a guess, they were probably mostly Phoenician. And the Phoenicians were Canaanites that were not wiped out, and were also most likely sons of sea peoples. Again, we don't know this absolutely for a fact. It's just an educated guess. Yeah, these guys are doing their job. Alright, looks like the Nile Delta is mostly clear. That's good. Hour 5. I just love how all these historical issues really come together. But anyway, so we have King Solomon, and what happens with him, right? number one, when King Solomon got into power in the first place, King Solomon, it wasn't like a clean transfer of power. Solomon was like the eighth in descent, I think, from David. David had lots of different wives. Oh, nice. The Canaanites are wiped out, and Egypt is wiped out. Looks like we accomplished what the Israelites in the Bible were unwilling to fully accomplish. Entirely. Okay, so when King Solomon, after the collapse of, not the collapse, after he died, so he had Rehoboam, that was his son, and then another man, Jeroboam, was essentially anointed as the next king by the prophet Ahijah, whatever translation you prefer. And he was given the majority of the kingdom. Judah and Benjamin, who the Jewish people, so to speak, descend from, whose Jew comes from Judah, or Judean. They get the southern kingdom. Now, one thing a lot of people miss is that northern Israel, was still basically a superpower when it got divided, and it stayed that way for quite a while until it turned into Game of Thrones, but on steroids. Like it's said in this empire, Israel became, and northern Israel was, oh heck yeah, no more barbarians, we just got, okay, cool. Should we sink the ships? I don't see a Mehmed II situation where I can just transport them over land, so. Alright. Man, I'm surprised the Egyptians succumbed that quickly. It's interesting. Huh. Okay, so. Screw it, I'll just get more. Where is it? Yeah, so northern Israel, and the further it goes on in the timeline to where it culminates with, like it reaches its apex under a chariot captain by the name of Omri. And you might not have heard of him, but he was the father of King Ahab. And if you're a Christian, King Ahab and Queen Jezebel are very recognizable names. Now, it's around this time that Assyria and Babylon start to pop back up. And now these are the Neo-Assyrian and the Neo-Babylonian empires. And then you got the Hittites. And if I remember correctly, the Hittites were sort of displaced by kind of a mercantile people called the Lydians, who weren't really related to anyone else. I could be wrong about that. But the Hittites kind of disappear entirely, and you don't really hear about them anymore in the Bible. Okay, doors open there. Yeah, if I just organize this stuff, they'd already be gone. Alright, we'll just do it the easy way. Yeah, so you end up with Judah and Israel, and then Judah has King Asa, Jehoshaphat, and Where was I going with this? Okay. So yeah, basically the point is Israel and Phoenicia, and you end up with Carthage. They ended up as, declining between the years after Solomon's death, and then kind of a gradual, you could say, maintenance of power in both kingdoms up until 800 BC. I'm just gonna throw out that number. About midway through their existence. And then, respectively, you ultimately end up with Israel getting conquered by the Assyrians and Judah getting conquered about 100 years later by the Babylonians. Now, while Israel fills that power vacuum, it's almost like an inverse proportionality where Israel is there, Israel and Judah. And these two, countries, Judah wasn't really an empire so much, whereas Israel was. And they fight these wars against each other, and then Israel, it's mentioned in the Bible, is said to have been the most, so wicked at a point, because they, with the Phoenician influence, they turned to Baal worship and Ashtoreth. And Baal is a Canaanite deity that, he's dealt with in Deuteronomy with Baal Peor during after the Exodus. So it's not so much that the Phoenicians themselves invent these deities, as the Phoenicians are more like remnants of the the Canaanites, who are really wicked. And that that's kind of a fun question. So people talk about how Israel today is the descendant of the ancient kingdom of Israel. Well, which one? Because if you're going to use the logic of, if you're against Israel, then you're against God, or to criticize Israel means you're anti-Semitic. Well, what about the ancient northern kingdom of Israel that was said in the Bible to have been the most wicked of, so wicked that even the Babylonians and Assyrians would shudder. They were just amazed at how messed up they were. And then later, you see that same pattern with the Carthaginians. Maybe I should just wrap up this video. Just march right in. Now this actually leads, so I just thought of this, because in this scenario you do wipe out Assyria and Babylon. What if the Israelites were actually, because when they came into Canaan, they wiped out the majority of groups there that have been there for centuries. What if the Israelites were, what if when they refer to sea peoples, the Israelites are included in that? Just food for thought. Again, where are the rest of the guys hiding there? They're definitely hiding. Okay, middle of Syria is resigned. Good. Build a farm. Don't be lazy. Oh, no wonder they're sitting right on my doorstep. I'm gonna jack that. Alright, and before we end, we're going to talk about one more kind of phenomenon, and that's that of Carthage. Now, Carthage is largely overlooked in our history, with the exception of their existence in relation to that of Rome during the Punic Wars. Now, the Carthaginians, remember, were a major power, and that started to grow around the same time that the Babylonians and Assyrians, and then later the Persians also started to grow again. But the difference is the Carthaginians, so in the east, the south, you have the Egyptians. They're kind of like almost like a neutral power, because the Babylonians and Assyrians are both straight up telerocracies. They spitting definitions of land powers. Egypt's kind of a mostly land power, but it has the capabilities of a sea power, especially because it's right on the coast. They're a little bit of both. Phoenicia's a pure thalassocracy, pure maritime power. Carthage is another pure maritime empire, but it's basically the next evolution of the Phoenicians, in the same sense that the United States, which was founded on it was really a war of independence in favor of mercantilism, because America was founded it's with elements of a sea and a land power, but mostly a sea power. Britain, and anyone even remotely familiar with history understands that Britain was the predominant maritime power for like 200 to 300 years. America essentially continued on the traditions that the British had created, and essentially replaced the role of Britain in the world. In the same sense, Carthage replaced the role of Phoenicia, especially because Phoenicia got conquered alongside the Israelites with the Assyrians. And the two were, at that time, they would have been virtually indistinguishable from one another. Now it says in the Bible that the population, because when Israel was at its height, there's these periods where there's these censuses, and it's in the millions. But by the time Assyria actually gets conquered, there's maybe, I think, less than 50,000 people there total. So the question is, what happened to everyone? Did they really all get taken into captivity? Or did they go somewhere else? Well, if you're dealing with a situation like, let's say, Great Britain is in decline, I'm not saying, I mean, it is. It's been, honestly, since really the start of British decline was since the end of World War I. But if the British, for instance, saw that their country was on the edge of collapse, where are they going to go? Well, America. I mean, there's other countries too, but America would be more than likely the most enticing place and the most potentially stable place. Because, I mean, you could go to Canada, but Canada's still part of the British Commonwealth, and so it's gonna run into the same issues on the macro scale that Britain would run into. Now, in this, using the same logic, as Israel, northern Israel, and Judah too. Judah would also, because Judah was, after King Josiah, they didn't, that was basically their last hope. And even by then, it was to the point where, as much as King Josiah could have done, it's not. It was on its decline anyway. missing something. Oh, it's not paying attention. So my personal theory is that the majority of these people that were disillusioned with the collapse, yay, disillusioned obviously with the collapse, and that they could see that their empire was on a decline. What's the logical thing? Well, move to Carthage. There were ships going there constantly. In some of the like books of Ezekiel, it's pretty clear that Carthage, there was constant trade across the Mediterranean, Carthage being one of the key destinations. And in certain translations, it actually refers to Tarshish, where Jonah tried to flee, as Carthage. And that would make total sense because Carthage was clear in the opposite direction of Nineveh. And Carthage was also basically a cousin country to Israel because they spoke almost the same language. They worshipped the same deities, generally speaking. And I mean, maybe Carthage did worship God, Yahweh, for a while. We don't really know. But it was definitely, and it wasn't, at least in its early days, it wasn't really it was, it was a more benevolent place to live. It wasn't until later where it started becoming really corrupt and constant child sacrifice. Anyway. Oh, the Elamites, yeah. See, that's the thing. I don't think the Sea Peoples, the Sea Peoples definitely didn't come in and conquer Babylon or Assyria. They didn't invade that far. Yeah, see, here it is. The influence and power over the Mediterranean never really recovered. Many tribes, some were captured, some became slaves in Egypt. Yeah. Yeah, so really, I would say that the key part of the collapse, the key factor was the fact that it disrupted the trade of tin and copper. Like, it disrupted the global supply chain. Bronze, people don't realize, they think iron's stronger. Bronze is actually a lot stronger and more formidable than iron, but you can't make it. You can't. Well, I don't know that's a lot, but it definitely has advantages over iron. But it can't be made unless you have the proper materials and the way to forge it. When that supply chain's disrupted, you can't make it anymore to the scale that you would need to. So let's look at what we got here. So yeah, and then did the ancient tribes of Israel, did they cause the collapse? No, I don't think so. I think what more than likely happened was that collapse happened at just such a time that allowed them to kind of move in and fill that vacuum. And then the supply chain collapse itself basically just weakened these other empires to the point where, like it said in that outro, the Elamites down here to the southeast, what's now Iran, and they were able to destabilize the Kassites to the point where that Babylonian empire fell, and then the Assyrians, they all had enemies in that region. Scythians, for instance. Hittites were wiped out, but yeah, like it said, only the Egyptians really survived it, but they never really came back to their former glory. So All right, well that's a bit long for today, but yeah, I hope you learned something and enjoyed watching. See ya.